Babylon's Banksters, Ancient Temple Roots. Babylon's Banksters, Ancient Temple Roots. You're listening to Babylon's Banksters, Ancient Temple Roots, presented by Hakeem Alebokis Alexander on Wisdom, Social Podcasting, and Spreaker Social Audio Inc. Presented for World Reading Club in association with UniquilibriuM. This edition's reading focus comes from Babylon's Banksters by Joseph P. Farrell, 2010. And this is labeled in Roman numerals 2, The Temples, the Stars, and the Banksters. There's a quote. So it was that the temple should owe fealty to the gods alone, become a front for the international money creative force of that day and age. Connected closely with the trade in precious metals and slaves, as it must have been. Again, so it was that the temple should owe fealty to the gods alone, become a front for the international money creative force of that day and age, connected closely with the trade in precious metals and slaves, as it must have been. David Assel, The Babylonian Woe, page 25. 4. Temples, templates, and trusts, the ancient roots of a deep relationship. Quote, the determination of the stars to which some of the Egyptian temples, sacred to a known divinity, were directed, opened a way, anticipated, to a study of the astronomical basis of parts of the mythology. J. Norman Locklear. Quote, to put it in the terse language of Bastiat, society implies exchange, and exchange money. Alexander Del Mar. Paradoxically, farther back in history one goes, the closer the relationships between science, magic, and money becomes. Many have commented upon this relationship, but few have understood its significance for the type of physics that it implies. The nature of this relationship and the conspiratorial implications that it implies is best exhibited by examining the relationship of gold mining and slavery in ancient Egypt. But it is important to begin at the beginning in order to see how and in what manner of a conspiracy can be glimpsed. From earliest times, the power to make and issue money and regulate the value thereof, paraphrased the U.S. Constitution, has been recognized to be the sole prerogative of the state, or in more ancient times, the crown or king. Let's see, where in the U.S. Constitution is that exactly? I have a copy of it here. I'd like to see. Let's see, where is that? What does it say? To make and issue money and regular value thereof. Oh, to paraphrase the U.S. Constitution. Well, it's in there somewhere. You know what? I thought I had it marked somewhere, but no. I do have the part, the 16th Amendment ratified on February 3rd, 1913 about taxes. Let's see. No, I'm going to continue. This might be a little bit long, so I'm going to pass on that for a moment and continue with Babylon's Banksters. All right, so as the infamous or infamous as the famous 19th century American numismatic scholar Alexander Del Mar aptly put it, the right to coin money has always been and still remains the surest mark and announcement of sovereignty. Indeed, it is because it is a sure mark and announcement of sovereignty that one finds the association of the making and regulation of the legal value of money so intertwined not only with the sovereignty of the state or crown, but with the sovereignty of God, or, as the case may be, of the gods, from whom the power of rule in most ancient societies was invariably perceived to derive, and no better exemplar of this complex relationship between the state control of money issuance, of mining, and the close talk of both with religion can be found in that of ancient republican and imperial Rome. A. Temples and trusts. 1. The Roman model. As money in ancient times was primarily, though certainly not exclusively, thought to reside in precious metals such as gold, copper, silver, and in some cases even bronze, it inevitably followed that for a state to maintain its sovereignty over the making, issuance, and regulation of the value of money, it had to exercise a strict control over the mining of those metals. Therefore, the means necessary to secure and maintain such a money were for the state to monopolize the copper mines, restrict the commerce in copper, strike copper pieces of high artistic merit in order to defeat counterfeiting, stamp them with the mark of the state, render them the sole legal tenders for the payment of domestic contracts, taxes, fines, and debts, limit their emission until their value, universal demand for them and their comparative scarcity, rose to more than that of the metal of which they were composed, and maintain such restriction and overvaluation as the permanent policy of the state. For foreign trade or diplomacy, a supply of gold and silver, coined and uncoined, could be kept in the treasury. Now, something that was just there about where it says, render them the sole legal tenders for payment of domestic contracts, fines, and debts, and it says limit their emission until their value rose to more than that of the metal of which they were composed. That part. Limit their emission until their value rose to more than that of the metal of which they were composed reminds me of two things. When I buy gold and silver coins, how you can buy the metals at what's known as their spot value, but then some of them have a premium added to it because of either the year they were coined or certain things about them that raises them above the spot value of them. And then also, again, where it says the same thing, right? Limit their emission until their value rose to more than that of the metal, and this rose to more than that of the diamonds. I don't know if some of you know this, but there are enough diamonds in the world for everybody to have softball-sized diamonds if they wanted to at very low prices, but they're held in vaults, and their emission, as he says, is limited. All right, continuing. There are ample evidences that means of this character were, in fact, employed by the Roman Republic, and therefore that such was the system of money it adopted. The copper mines were monopolized by the Roman state. The commerce in copper was regulated. The bronze numi were issued by the state, which strictly monopolized their fabrication, and the designs were of great beauty. The pieces were stamped SC, or ex senates consulta. Their emission was limited until the values of the pieces rose to about 5 times that of the metal they contained, and they steadily, and for a lengthy period of time, retained this high overvaluation. Thus, we have 3 interconnected ideas at the outset. 1. The power to coin and regulate the value of money by established law was a prerogative solely of the state or crown, and not of any private money or credit issuing monopoly. 2. There was no inherent value in precious metals as such, but such value had to be artificially created by the state issuing such money by two means. A. The relative scarcity of precious metal money issued, the legal monetary value of money issued exceed the inherent value of the metal in the coin itself, and B. The value was further enhanced by the creation or addition of artwork to the coins issued. And 3. Because the issuance of money was connected to precious metals such as copper, silver, and gold, the state or had to maintain a monopoly over the mining and stockpiling of such metals. A. The bullion trust and the temple. But in ancient Rome, there is a further factor at work, and it is best to allow Mr. Del Mar himself to state what it is. Quote, "It is impossible to resist the conviction," he states, "that the superior value of gold in the West was created by means of legal and perhaps also sacerdotal ordinances. This method of fixing the ratio may even have originated in the Orient. In other words, in fixing the value of gold at a ratio of certain units of value expressed in terms of other metals per unit of gold, gold's value as the ultimate precious metal was established largely through religious ordinances. Moreover, Del Mar suggests this practice originated in the Orient, which could mean, as far as Rome was concerned, the Middle East, or even the East as far away as India. So one now must add to the above list a fourth connection. 4. The value of gold was fixed largely by sacerdotal ordinance. In other words, there is a deep and profound connection between the issuance of money, its fixation of value in terms of precious metals, whose value in turn is defined by ratios per unit of gold on the one hand, and religion on the other. In short, one is in the presence of the deep connection of ancient conceptions of money and religion, or, as I put it in the chapter title, between temples and trusts. But why call such a relationship, on the monetary side of things, a trust at all? Del Mar provides a significant clue in a statement that, on its first glance, seems to evidence nothing more than a difference in monetary and metals policies on the part of Occidental and Oriental societies. He states that, quote, "The governments of Persia, Assyria, Egypt, Greece, and Rome made a profit on the coinage by raising the value of gold, while those of India, China, and perhaps also Japan made their profit by maintaining or enhancing the value of silver." In other words, for the societies of the Occident, Egypt, Assyria, and presumably Babylon, Persia, Greece, and Rome, artificially defined gold as being the metal of highest value in terms of its convertibility into more units of other metals, while, conversely, the governments of the Orient, India, and China pursued the reverse policy of making silver the highest valued metal in terms of its convertibility into other metals. Thus, trade carried out between these two disparate parts of the world. The policies were in a certain sense an inevitable consequence of that trade. However, a closer examination reveals a hidden player, for such trade will inevitably create the rise of an international trading class, one which, moreover, will create its wealth precisely by trade in these precious metals, metals that are easier to transport than finished goods, and which can be exchanged in any place for such goods. In short, what is being created from earliest times is an international financial class of bullion workers, or as we would call them now, bankers. A significant question now occurs. Is it possible, rather than such a class having emerged as a consequence of such governmental policy and trade, that the converse is true? Is it possible that there existed such a class of international bullion brokers who created these policies in various parts of the world, policies which would enhance their own power and wealth? If so, then how did they achieve and orchestrate this? The answer to that question will consume us in the remaining chapters of this book, but in order to answer it, we must once again turn to the unusual fixation of the value of gold and silver in the Occidental cultures, Greece, Egypt, the Mesopotamian civilizations, and Rome. Why was gold, which was much easier and less costly to mine than silver, valued more highly than silver? Del Mar has already suggested the answer. It was because, in some measure, gold was regarded as sacred, as being under the special jurisdiction of the gods. The sacerdotal character conferred upon gold, or the coinage of gold, was not a novelty of the Julian constitution of Rome. Rather, it was an ancient myth put to new political use. A similar belief is to be noticed among the ancient Greeks, whose coinages, except during the Republican era, were conducted in the temples and under the supervision of priests. Upon these issues were stamped the symbolism and religion of the state, and, as only the priesthood could correctly illustrate, these mysteries of their own creation, the coinage, at least that of more precious pieces, naturally became a prerogative of their order. That's interesting. I mean, of course, everybody will note, like in this silver coin I have in hand, that it says on the face of in God we trust, right? I wonder, and even on the dollars, which I think it's erroneously printed on paper money or fiat currency, because it's not metal and it's not backed by anything anymore, except usually first the U.S. dollar, they were called silver certificates. At least that's what JFK wanted, and they were backed by gold previously, and then the U.S. dollar became the petrodollar because it was backed by oil reserves and things like that, but no more. Well, it is somewhat, because the United States is what's known as the reserve currency of the world, but today is the meeting of BRICS, right? BRICS, which is Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, which is meeting in order to discuss a new reserve currency, one that is digital in part, but also is maybe backed by precious metals once again. But there are actually 30 or 40 other nations that are meeting, and that's today, August 22nd. So we'll see what happens with that. People speculate that it's actually going to be for them to issue a new currency backed by gold, rather than just being a fiat currency as the currency in the U.S. dollar actually is. But we'll see what happens with that. All right, continuing. Since they're in the future, so to speak, because of the time zone, it may have already happened, but I haven't been keeping up with it today. All right, so continuing. But this raises many questions as it resolves. For example, Del Mar has clearly indicated that the prerogative of the issuance of money and the regulation of its value was seen by ancient societies to reside clearly with the state or crown. Yet he has now admitted that insofar as one precious metal was concerned, the issuance of money in connection was less a prerogative of the state or crown than it was of a religious monopoly. Additionally, it has already been suggested that the differences in monetary policies between the Occident and should serve in the long run not only to contribute to the rise of an international class of bullion brokers, but also that the creation of such policies might even be due to the pre-existence of that class, its international extent, and its ability to manipulate the respective policies of Occidental and Oriental governments, and insofar as that ability to manipulate their respective policies is concerned. When it comes to the high sacredness of gold, at least within Occidental cultures, this implies also the ability to manipulate their religions. Succinctly said, the bullion trust and the temple are at the minimum allies, and at the maximum, the one has infiltrated and taken over the other. Or, in Delmar's apt observation, one now seen to be pregnant with meaning and significance just beneath its surface. The sacredness of gold was an ancient myth put to new political use. B. A fascinating tangent. Byzantium, religion, and the money power. A fascinating glimpse into the strength of this association between the money-issuing prerogative of the state or crown on the one hand and religion on the other is afforded by the Eastern Roman or Byzantine Empire, whose power and influence throughout Christian Europe during the Middle Ages extended far beyond its ever-shifting borders. That power and influence was due precisely because of the strength of this relationship and its hold over the cultural imagination of the Christian Middle Ages, because for all their claimed divine prerogatives, not even the Roman popes understood their power to include the ability to make and issue money and regulate its value. That prerogative was understood to reside still with the Roman emperor in Constantinople. Noting that the very moment when these people became Christians or were conquered or brought under the control of the Roman hierarchy, their gold mines began to be abandoned and closed. Various numismatic scholars had long proffered various unsatisfactory explanations, but, states Delmar, all such futile explanations are effectually answered by the common use of Byzantine gold coins throughout Christendom. In England, for example, the exchequer rolls relating to the medieval ages, collated by Maddox, prove that payments in gold besants were made every day, and that gold coins, as compared with silver ones, were as common then as now. If metal had been wanted for making English gold coins, it was to be had in sufficiency and at once. All that was necessary was to throw the besants into the English melting pot. As for the feeble suggestion that for 500 years no Christian princes wished to coin gold so long as the Basilius was willing to coin them, when the coinage of gold was the universally recognized mark of sovereignty, and when, though the profit was 100%, it is scarcely worth answering. The true reason why gold money was always used but never coined by the princes of the medieval The true reason why money was always used but never coined of the medieval empires relates to that hierarchical constitution of pagan Rome, which afterwards, with modifications, became the constitution of Christian Rome. Under this constitution, and from the epoch of Julius to that of Alexis, the mining and coinage of gold was a prerogative attached to the office of the sovereign pontiff, and was, therefore, an article of the Roman constitution and of the Roman religion. Thus, as Delmar notes, prior to the Latin Crusade, which attacked and successfully occupied Constantinople in 1204, no Christian prince in Europe dared coin his own gold coins prior to that event, but after it, all of them did. And thus, the hidden motivation of the attack of the Christian West on the Christian East in 1204 is revealed. It was to acquire the legal authority under the Roman constitution to make and coin gold money. Thereafter, the money-issuing prerogative devolved to the lesser crowned heads of Europe. Prior to that point, however, it would have been sacrilege to give currency to any other gold coinage. Hence, no other Christian prince, not even the Pope of Rome, nor the sovereign of the Western or medieval empire, attempted to coin gold while the ancient empire survived. Such monies were quite literally viewed as heretical money. Hence, we have yet another possible explanation for the preoccupation of the crowned heads of medieval Western Europe with alchemy during the Middle Ages. Alchemy's claim was, of course, to be able to take base metals and transform them into gold. Thus, by taking imitation coins of the gold basant, coins that could not be deemed counterfeit since they were not circulated nor coined by anyone in gold, and transmuting them into gold, an alchemical end run around Byzantium's money monopoly achieved. 2. The Egyptian model: mining, slavery, mercenaries, and implications. A. Nubia and Egypt. The connections thus far exhibited between the money coining prerogative of the state, the International Bullion Brokers Trust, the temple, and now alchemy, leads one inexorably back further into history, and to the even tighter relationships between them that are exhibited in Egypt. It is here that one begins to see more clearly the sinister outlines that International Bullion Brokers Trust emerging. It is here that one begins to see more clearly the sinister outlines of that International Bullion Brokers Trust emerging, and of its deep relationship not only to the temple, but to the deeper physics that the temple and money portended. Egypt is also significant for another reason, as we shall see, in that it is a symbol of the relationship of the bullion trust to the temple, a relationship that also occurs in other states and civilizations of the period. Egypt was probably the largest gold mining and producing state in the ancient world. The reason is simple: the Nile. As Alexander Del Mar puts it, gold has been found in nearly every region tributary to the Nile, from the equator to the first cataract. But no religion was more connected to gold mining than was the region of Nubia, bordering modern-day southern Egypt and the Sudan. The term Nubia itself appears to have originated in Egypt, where Nab or Nub signifies gold, hence Nubia, the land of gold. Beneath the foothills of Nubia lies a vast gravel and sand expanse of desert, washed during the flood season by numerous streams and gullies. This region is known as the Bishari, or Bashara, the Great Nubian Desert. Del Mar notes that, next to the mines of the Altai Mountains of India, the Bishari mines of Egypt are probably the oldest in the world, and in view of the Indian origin of the Egyptians, and the distant researches and conquests which have been made by the leading nations for the acquisition of gold, it seems not all improbable that there existed a close connection between the discovery of the Egyptian mines and the original settlement of the country by Asiatic races. So rich were the Bishari mines in antiquity that it is worth having a closer look at them, for it is in that closer look that we shall discern a pattern beginning to emerge. B. Quartz, gold, and slavery. The Bishari mines, as noted above, are among the oldest known in antiquity, and some of the most extensive. Additionally, the fields, like many gold mines, are also known for their abundant deposits of quartz. If conjecture be admitted where dates are confused, it appears likely that the Bishari mines were worked as early as the era of Menes, which is variously assigned to from 29 to 39 centuries BC. For in the time of that monarch or lawgiver, the Nile was diked, and from the character of this river and its surroundings, there could have been no necessity to dike it until Mars had surcharged its waters with sediment. The supposed antiquity of these mines derives support from the fact that even at the period of Menes, gold was used for money in India, that Menes was an Indian conqueror and lawgiver, that the Indian code of Manu, still extant and assigned from the 15th to the 31st century BC is evidently recompiled from a much older code, now lost, that commerce between India and Egypt existed from the remotest times mentioned in history or derived from archaeological remains, that an Egyptian expedition to India is attributed to Sesostris BC 2000 and from any other consideration. However this may be, the Bishari mines are known to have been worked for quartz so long ago as the 12th dynasty, which Lepsius assigns to the period BC 2830, from the fact, understood by every miner, that quartz is never worked so long as the placers contain the smallest practical quantity of metal, and, judging from the experience of Italy, Spain, and Brazil, where extensive placer deposits were worked, as in Egypt, by the hand labor of slaves, the Bishari places mines were at least 200 years old when the quartz was worked under the 12th dynasty of the Pharaohs. Note the presence of two new factors that will loom larger and larger as we proceed. First, the presence of precious or semi-precious stones, in this case quartz, and the working of such mines by slaves. C. Diodorus Siculus and the Bishara mines. It is the presence of slaves at the Bishari mines that affords us our first significant clue into the minds and mentality of the ancient bullion workers, and why they and their activities are so often associated with temples. It requires a closer look, which is afforded by the classical writer Diodorus Siculus. Del Mar notes that Diodorus visited the mines in 50 BC. The visit, he recorded his impressions of the mines. On the confines of Egypt and in neighboring countries, there are regions full of gold mines, whence, with the cost and pains of many laborers, much gold is dug. The soil is naturally black, but the body of the earth there are many veins of shining white quartz, glittering with all sorts of bright metals, out of which those appointed to be overseers cause the gold to be dug by the labor of a vast multitude of people. For the kings of Egypt condemned to these mines not only notorious criminals, captives taken in war, persons accused of false dealings, and those with whom the kind is offended, but also all the kindred and relatives of the latter. These are sent to this work, either as a punishment, or that the profit and gain of the king may be increased by their labors. There are thus infinite numbers thrown into these mines, all bound in fetters, kept at work night and day, and so strictly surrounded that there is no possibility of their effecting an escape. They are guarded by mercenary soldiers of various barbarous nations, whose language is foreign to them and to each other, so that there are no means either of forming conspiracies or of corrupting those who are set to watch them. They are kept to incessant work by the rod of the overseer, who often lashes them severely. Not the least care is taken of the bodies of these poor creatures. They have not a rag to cover their nakedness, and whoever sees them must compassionate their melancholy and deplorable condition. For though they may be sick or maimed or lame, no rest nor any intermission of labor is allowed them. Neither the weakness of old age nor the infirmities of females excuse any from the work, to which all are driven by blows and cudgels, until, borne down by the intolerable weight of their misery, many fall dead in the midst of their insufferable labors. Deprived of all hope, these miserable creatures expect each day to be worse than the last, and long for death to end their griefs. While the passage is one to move any decent human being to compassion and pity for the poor wretches condemned to work the mines, there are two things that should be noted. First, given the antiquity of the mines of Bishari and the stability of Egyptian society and culture, it is reasonable to assume that the conditions at the mines had not changed throughout the several centuries that they were worked. Thus, secondly, the presence of an international contingent of mercenary guards of the mines might well be a practice dating back for centuries. The reasons for such an international contingent Diodorus makes clear. It was to deny the condemned any opportunity of bribing a sufficient contingent of guards to effect an escape. But mercenaries might signal something else, and that is a certain collusion between the Egyptian kings and those able to supply such a large and disparate groups of mercenaries. To put it succinctly, the mercenary guard contingent subtly implies the existence of an international money power, but implication is not yet proof. D. Money, kings, temples, and counterfeiters. There is, however, another indication that something more than mere coincidence is involved in the use of mercenaries at the Bishari mines. Another clue lies in the widespread association of ancient temples with the issuance of precious metal monies. The archaic Chinese and Indian, as well as early Greek coins, were often marked with emblems, which in the former cases are supposed to be, and in the latter case are known to be, religious. The mints were in the temples, and the priests monopolized or tried to monopolize the secrets of metallurgy. This custom may have arisen either from the cupidity of the priesthood to reap of coinage, or solicitude on the part of the sovereign to prevent counterfeiting or to render it the more heinous. This fact, plus the fact of international contingents of mercenaries at Bishari, has now amassed a significant series of questions. All right, so that last part, right, before this says, this custom may have arisen either from the cupidity, meaning the love of the priesthood to reap the profits of the coinage, or solicitude on the part of the sovereign to prevent counterfeiting, or to render it the more heinous. So by making it to make counterfeit more heinous. Interesting. So we have, on one, they love reaping profits of coinage, and two, making it much more difficult to counterfeit. All right, continuing. This fact, plus the fact of international contingents of mercenaries at Bishari, has now amassed a significant series of questions. 1. Why ancient mints in temples, especially if, as Del Mar has conceded and as we have already examined, the prerogative of money issuance and value regulation was solely a state or crown prerogative? Part of the answer, of course, lies in the fact that in most ancient cultures, particularly those of the Middle East, the king was in fact also the chief or high priest, and the priesthood itself often fulfilled the function of the state bureaucracy. Nonetheless, the question remains, why associate money issues with temples? 2. The widespread practice of this association in such disparate cultures as China, India, and Greece itself must be explained. Does it lie, once again, merely in the close association of the crown prerogative with the priesthood in ancient societies, or is there something else involved, something perhaps signaled by the presence of international mercenary contingents at Bishari? We have already suggested that the peculiar policies of Rome vis-a-vis the Orient in the regulation of gold and silver valuation suggested a certain amount of collusion between the states so affected, a collusion suggesting an international coordination of such policies. Now we find at the Bishari mines yet another suggestion of such international collusion in the presence of mercenaries from various cultures. The question is, then, who is doing it and why? Part of the answer is suggested by a passing observation made by Del Mar. The Egyptians, possessing the most extensive and productive gold mines, which are known to have been worked at any certain period of antiquity, furnished to other nations, including the Indians, the material out of which they too could make money. The Egyptians, possessing the most extensive and productive gold mines, which are known to have been worked at any certain period of antiquity, furnished to other nations, including the Indians, the material out of which they too could make money. This is the surest testament of the fact that we are now in the presence of an international bullion brokers conspiracy. For why would India need Egyptian gold to issue money? Why could the Indian kings and princes not have issued some other money based on some other commodity which it had in abundance and require its acceptance by law? Such was their prerogative. So why rely on imports of gold? The argument that an internationally recognized medium of exchange was needed falls to the ground, for as already noted, India and China preferred the Roman era to value silver higher than gold, while the Occident preferred the reverse. Moreover, by diplomatic agreement and treaty, other mechanisms of exchange could have been agreed upon by various heads of state. In any case, we have now assembled three discrete types of evidence that point to the possible existence of an international money power, or bullion brokers as we have called them in ancient times. 1. The usual bullion policies of Rome vis-a-vis the Orient, which policies were virtual opposites of each other with respect to the relative valuation of silver and gold bullion. Such reciprocal policies could, of course, highly benefit an international money power with bases of operations in both places. For by transferring gold to the East and converting it to silver and reaping the fees thereof, and then silver to the West and converting again to gold, vast profits could be accumulated. 2. The almost universal association of temples with minting from the Middle East to China and India. And 3. The presence of an international contingent of mercenaries from various countries and states at one of antiquity's largest gold mines at Bishari, mines which in turn are worked by slaves and prisoners of war. There is, however, a distinctly different association of temples in ancient times, besides that of minting and money issuance. B. Temples and templates, astronomy, astrology, and the alchemy of money. 1. The temples and the stars. That association is with time and its measurement, in short, with astrology and astronomy. Today, of course, it is widely accepted that ancient temples and megalithic sites were oriented to this or that astronomical event or alignment, the solstices, the precession of the equinoxes, and so on. Societies and civilizations such as Sumer and Babylonia were well known for their strong astronomical and astrological skills, having left literally thousands of clay tablets recording their observations. But until comparatively recently, in the 19th century, Egypt was the exception to this rule, until a British astronomer, J. Norman Lockyer, demonstrated that the same held true for Egypt's temples as well, and from the most ancient times. Lockyer's book, The Dawn of Astronomy, a study of temple worship and mythology of the ancient Egyptians, began a cycle that continues to this day, with alternative Egyptologists such as Andrew Collins, Graham Hancock, and Robert Bauval demonstrating the astronomical layouts and alignments of the site most people associate with ancient Egypt, the pyramids and temples of Giza. One might thus well view Lockyer as one of the first modern paleophysicists, i.e., a modern scientist looking at ancient myths seriously and attempting to reconstruct from them an underlying scientific basis. Lockyer notes that ancient civilizations' astronomical and astrological records go back almost to the very edges of antiquity. We go back in Egypt for a period, as estimated by various authors, of something like 6,000 or 7,000 years. In Babylonia, inscribed tablets carry us into the dim past for a period of certainly 5,000 years. But the so-called omen tablets indicate that observations of eclipses and other astronomical phenomena had been made for some thousands of years before this period. In China and India, we go back as certainly to more than 4,000 years ago. Indeed, in Babylon's case, if one is to take the assertions of the omen tablets seriously, these observations comprised a database assiduously compiled for hundreds of thousands of years. Decoding the association of various Egyptian temples to various gods and the association of the latter in terms of various celestial bodies, Lockyer states his main thesis toward the end of his book, calling it his working hypothesis. 1. The first civilization as yet glimpsed, so far as temple building goes, in northern Egypt, represented by that at Anu or Heliopolis, was a civilization with a non-equinoctial solar worship, combined with the cult of a northern star. 2. Memphis, possibly also Sais, Bubastis, Tanis, and other cities with east and west walls, and the Great Pyramids were built by a new invading race, representing an advance in astronomical thought. The northern stars were worshipped possibly on the meridian, and a star rising in the east was worshipped at each equinox. 3. The subsequent blank in Egyptian history associated with conflicts between these and other races, which were ended by the victory of the representatives of the old worship of Anu, reinforced from the south, as if North Star and South Star cults had combined against the equinoctial cult. After these conflicts, East and West pyramid building practically ceased. Memphis takes a second place, and Thebes, a southern Anu, so far as the form of solar worship and the cult of Sit are concerned, comes upon the scene as the seat of the 12th dynasty. 4. The subsequent historical events were largely due to conflicts with intruding races from the northeast. The intruders established themselves in cities with east and west walls, and were on each occasion driven out by solstitial worshippers who founded dynasties 8th and 25th, 18th and 25th at Thebes. We shall not concern ourselves with the lengthy arguments that Lockyer presented in order to arrive at these conclusions, but note only that the various conflicts in Egypt, given Lockyer's astronomical premise for temple orientation, were in a certain sense as much about physics as they were about religion. Given the fact that Babylonian temples were well known to be associated with various deities and celestial bodies, and that Egypt's demonstrably were as well, as Lockyer argued, we now note that the peculiar fact that temples, for a reason as yet unknown, were closely associated both with celestial alignments and the minting and issuance of bullion-based currencies, or bullion-based monies. One possible reason for the association, however, is suggested by well-known space researcher Richard C. Hoagland. I approach Hoagland's remarks by noting a curious fact observed by Lockyer. In Lower Egypt, the temples are pointed to rising stars near the north point of the horizon, or setting north of west. In Upper Egypt, we deal chiefly with temples directed to stars rising in the southeast or setting low in the southwest. By the way, if anybody doesn't know the difference, Upper Egypt is in the southern part, meaning because it's uphill basically, and Lower Egypt is in the northern part, going from the Nile to the Delta, where the water flows downwards or to the lower part. So Upper Egypt is not northern. Some people mistake that. Upper Egypt is southern because it's uphill, and Lower Egypt is northern where the water flows downhill. Continuing. The fact that so many ancient temples show evidence both of a profound association with the stars through their astrological alignments and also of international banking through the prominent association of money changers with those temples is an indicator that and at a profound level, perhaps as a legacy of the very high civilization from which they sprang, these classical civilizations, through their marriage of banking and astrology, preserved the dim memory of a lost science that unified physics, economics, and finance. Hoagland made the following interesting series of observations in 1992 during his presentation of the Mars anomalies during a briefing at the United Nations. Or take the sun itself. For the last several years, scientists have been looking for nuclear particles supposedly coming from the center of the sun because of its thermonuclear reactions, a kind of chained H-bomb model. But for the last 20 years, they haven't found anywhere near as many of these particles as models would predict. In fact, the Soviets and the Japanese, who have recently brought online experiments to measure fundamental particles, have found none. It is possible that at the very center of our solar system, this incredible blazing ball of gas around which all the worlds in this system orbit is, in fact, fueled from another source. So it's a question, actually. It says, is it possible that at the very center of our system, this incredible blazing ball of gas around which all the worlds in this system orbit is, in fact, fueled from another source? Well, this opens up remarkable possibilities, which, when we look back at cultures on this planet and their attention to the sun, others may have also noticed. When we look at the stars, at the sky at night, we're not seeing chained and imprisoned H-bombs. We're seeing portals to another dimension. And the portals are glowing windows through which we can peer and glimpse the fragments of a physics from another side. What is stunning is when you take that metaphor and you go back and you read the actual Egyptian descriptions in the hieroglyphs for Sirius, the brightest star in the sky, the description is that Sirius is a doorway. Now, what did they know? What did they know? Now, looking at that as a 20th century Egyptologist, or as a modern anthropologist, or as any of the academics looking at the history of man and archaeology, the obvious answer is they didn't know anything. It was all primitive superstition. But we can now buttress this with specific mathematical linkages, which indicate strongly that the Egyptians, among many others, were profoundly aware that the night sky and all of reality is somehow circumscribed by the physics behind the circumscribed geometry given to us now by the monument of Mars. And that, of course, is an amazing statement to be able to make. But there's another, because the thought occurred then, after we had figured this part out, the potential, the possibility, that if in fact the sun is a gate to another dimension, and that the energy we see is merely a lower level transformation of a higher level force or energy process, it may be possible to harness such a process on Earth and to create an actual hyperdimensional technology. What could one do? What indeed did ancient Egypt, and by implication all other ancient cultures, with their persistent and consistent association of stars with deities or higher intelligences and other dimensions? Was there indeed a deeper physics behind their astrological obsessions? And what could one do with that physics? Hoagland has also suggested something else as well, and that is there is a physics connection with the ancient fixation on sacred geometry and the positioning of various temples and buildings on sites that embody such geometries, in this case, on Mars. And why does one find money changers invariably associated with these temples? One answer is hinted at by Lockyer. 2. The peculiar resemblance of pantheons between cultures. Lockyer makes yet another pertinent observation relevant to our purposes. To understand its significance, one need only consider the fact that if temples are associated with various gods, whether in Egypt or Mesopotamia, and various gods in turn are associated with various celestial bodies, then there should be considerable parallel between the pantheons of various civilizations, since, in a word, the underlying astronomical data are the same. This, he observes, is in fact what one actually sees. There is a peculiar parallel between the Egypt god Anu, or An, and the Babylonian Anu. More to the point, on an astronomical reading, the gods blend into each other. For example, the chief god of the Mesopotamian city of Eridu was Ea, aka Enki, aka Oannes, symbolized as a goatfish. This Ea or Enki sired a son, Tammuz, who was in some way associated with Asari, who, notes Lockyer, has a name suspiciously similar to the Egyptian Osiris. The god Tammuz, in return, ultimately becomes the notoriously murderous god Nergal in Chaldea. Oh boy. Nergal, by similar astronomical conversions, eventually actually becomes the spring sun Marduk of Babylon itself. In other words, lurking behind all these transformations and pantheonic parallels is the association of Enki with Nergal and Marduk, and via Tammuz with the Egyptian Osiris. Such pantheonic parallels are, once again, inevitable if, as Lockyer shows, the gods themselves are associated with various celestial bodies. The patterns of the heavens, as it were, formed a template with which to associate certain gods and their activities. However, given the fact that we now have the close association of temples not only with astronomy and astrology, but with money issuance, and therefore with mining, and given the fact that we have discovered 3 significant indicators that we may also be looking at the discrete and actions of an ancient international bullion broker's power, the similarity of pantheons may have other than astronomical causes. It may indeed be a product of the deliberate manipulation of those pantheons by an entity that has every appearance of being international in extent and influence in ancient times. But to what purpose? The answer to that question must unfortunately await the next chapter, as there is a further association of gods, gold, and temples to be explored. 3. Gold, gods, and gems. The other association is with precious and semi-precious gems. It is a peculiar fact, notes researcher George Frederick Koons, that from the earliest times in man's history, gems and precious stones have been held in great esteem. They have been found in the monuments of prehistoric peoples, and not alone the civilization of the pharaohs, of the Incas, or of the Montezumas, invested in these brilliant things from nature's jewel casket with a significance beyond the mere suggestion of their intrinsic properties. But give such items a significance beyond their intrinsic properties? One answer might lie in their well-known association with astrology from ancient times. The Magi, the wise men, the seers, the astrologers of the ages gone by the Magi, the wise men, the seers, the astrologers of ages gone by found much in the matter of gems that we have nearly come to forgetting. With them, each gem possessed certain planetary attractions peculiar to itself, certain affinities with the various virtues, and a zodiacal concordance with the seasons of the year. Moreover, these early sages were firm believers in the influence of gems in one's nativity, that the evil in the world could be kept from contaminating a child properly protected by wearing the appropriate talismanic, natal, and zodiacal gems. That is to say, gems, since they were associated with certain celestial alignments, planetary bodies, and houses of the zodiac, could quite literally, on the ancient view, draw down or ward off the influences of those bodies and alignments. But why did such a belief originate? What is the underlying cause? Search as one might for the answer to those questions amid ancient texts and tomes, one always comes up empty-handed, being met with the bare and naked assertion that it is so, with perhaps now and then an attempt, usually unconvincing, as to why it is so. Koons even notes that during the Renaissance, an effort was made to find reason of some sort for the traditional beliefs. Nor is he above suggesting that eventually science itself might suggest the reasons, or rather rediscover them. A. The traditional powers associated with gems. Putting aside the speculative scientific case for this association to a later chapter, we shall catalog here but a few of their alleged powers and virtues attributed to them by ancient lore. One almost universal property attributed to them is the ability to heal various maladies and infirmities. Oftentimes, these were associated specifically to their various colors and relative luminescence. In one case, Hindu tradition even describes diamonds as Indra's weapon. There are, in the Sumerian, stones of love and hate, or, as the Sumerian literally has it, unlove. And as readers of my book, The Cosmic War, know, one Sumerian epic, the Epic of Ninurta, is nothing but a rather dull inventory taking of some extraordinary stones that were captured after a gruesome war, shades of the imaginary scenario with which we began this book. And there are even some rather special cases of powers attributed to gemstones that merit closer attention. One, special case number 1, invisibility. Koons cites a passage from the 1659 treatise, The Faithful Lapidary, by Thomas Nichols, that is worth mentioning here. Nichols begins by enumerating a typical list of the reputed and assumed powers of precious gems. Perfectionem effectus contineri in causa. But it cannot truly be so spoken of gems and precious stones, the effects of which, by laperists, are said to be the making of men rich and eloquent, to preserve men from thunder and lightning, from plagues and diseases, to move dreams, to procure sleep, to foretell things to come, to make men wise, to strengthen memory, to procure honors, to hinder fascinations and crafts, to hinder slothfulness, to put courage into men, to keep men chaste, to increase friendship, to hinder difference and dissension. This is a fairly standard list, and one can even understand the attribution of the power to foretell things to come to stones, for given their astrological association, it stands to reason that the predictive properties of astrology should be associated with gemstones. But then comes a rather unusual statement. And to make men invisible, as is affirmed by Albertus and others, and many other strange things are affirmed of them and ascribed to them, which are contrary to the natures of gems. One wonders just what other strange things could possibly be attributed to the powers of gemstones beyond conferring invisibility. The belief that some stones could confer invisibility was echoed by a 14th century alchemist, Pierre de Boniface, who claimed that diamonds could make the wearer invisible. Given the alchemist is making these claims, one might be justified in drawing the speculative conclusion that this operation could only occur at certain times and under certain conditions, given the well-established fact that most alchemists claimed their operations had to be performed at certain times in order for them to work. 2. Special case number 2, magnetic levitation or anti-gravity. An even more stunning claim is made in a Viennese print of 1709 and an accompanying text of Valentini. Museorium Order di Volstandige Schaubühne, an obscure manuscript published in Frankfurt am Main in 1714. According to the text accompanying a curious print established in Vienna in 1709, the attractive qualities of the so-called coral agate, according to the text accompanying a curious print published in Vienna in 1709, the attractive qualities of the so-called coral agate were to be utilized in an airship, the invention of a Brazilian priest. Over the head of the aviator, as he sat in the airship, there was a network of iron to which large coral agates were attached. These were expected to help in drawing up the ship when, through the heat of the sun's rays, the stones had acquired magnetic power. The main lifting force was provided by powerful magnets enclosed in two metal spheres. How the magnets themselves were to be raised is not explained. Here, it is evident that, for whatever obscure reason, coral agate was thought to somehow amplify the effects of magnets in conjunction with exposure to rays of the sun. 3. Special case number 3, light-absorbing and emitting stones. A much more serious special case is mentioned by Koons in connection with the peculiar properties of Brazilian diamonds. The power of absorbing sunlight, or artificial light, and then giving it off in the dark is only possessed by certain diamonds. These are Brazilian stones, slightly milky in tint, or blue-white as they are often termed, and it is an included substance and not the diamond itself giving it out. Willemite kunzite, salarite, sulfide of zinc, and some other minerals possess the same power. Their peculiar property may be due to the presence of a slight quantity of manganese or to that of some of the uranium salts. That it is only the ultraviolet rays that are thus absorbed by these diamonds is proved by the fact that the phenomenon is not observable when a thin plate of glass is interposed between the sunlight of artificial light and the diamond, as glass is not traversed by these rays. On the other hand, all diamonds phosphoresce when exposed to the rays of radium, polonium, or actinium, even when glass is interposed. Treating some of the aspects of phosphorescence in diamonds, Sir William Crookes says, "In a vacuum, exposed to a high-tension current of electricity, diamonds phosphoresce of different colors. Most South African diamonds shining with a bluish light. Diamonds from other localities emit bright blue, apricot, pale blue, red, yellowish green, orange, and pale green light. The most phosphorescent diamonds are those which are fluorescent in the sun. One beautiful green diamond in my collection, when phosphorescing in a good vacuum, gives almost as much light as a candle, and you can easily read by its rays. The time has hardly come when diamonds can be used as domestic illuminants." This is a rather interesting comment by Crookes, for archaeologists have long puzzled how the ancient Egyptians managed to see inside their temples. If one grants the proposition that they may have known of and used electricity or other sources of phosphorescence, then might perhaps have discovered this quality of diamonds or other stones? In answer to this question, Koons makes an interesting observation. An old treatise in Greek, said in its title to come from the sanctuary of the temple and containing material partly of Egyptian, may help us to understand something of the processes employed by a temple priest to impress the common people by the sight of luminous gems. The writer of the treatise declares that for the production of the carbuncle that shines in the night, use was made of certain parts, he says, the bile, of marine animals, whose entrails, scales, and bones exhibited the phenomenon of phosphorescence. If properly treated, precious stones, preferably carbuncles, would glow so brightly at night that anyone owning such a stone could read or write by its light as well as he could by daylight. Note that the source for this assertion comes from ancient Greek alchemical texts. Alchemy is, of course, invariably associated with Egypt and its temples. We may reasonably assume, then, that such properties, known to the ancient Egyptian temple priesthoods, were among their most closely guarded secrets. B. Gemstones, the zodiac, and the Hebrew high priest ephod, or breastplate. Perhaps the most familiar association of precious gemstones with the temple and religion in Western culture is the breastplate or ephod of the Hebrew high priests described in the Old Testament of the Bible. So it is worth pausing before concluding this chapter to take stock of the various associations of the breastplate in Jewish lore. Kuhn observes that in rabbinical legend it is related that 4 precious stones were given by God to King Solomon. One of these was the emerald. The possession of the 4 stones is said to have endowed the wise king with power. This is a rather breathtaking claim for the power of these stones, whatever else they were in addition to the emerald. In my book, The Cosmic War, I noted that similar claims were made for the Sumerian tablets of destiny, stones which allegedly conferred all the power of the universe on their possessors, making them a technology highly prized and fought over by the various Sumerian gods. Here we encounter a similar claim from a much later period and in a different culture. Solomon, of course, is known not only for his legendary wisdom and wealth, but is also associated with the building of a magnificent temple. It is possible, if such stones existed, that the celebrated Hebrew king wore them in a royal version of the priestly breastplate or ephod, for there do exist Assyrian versions of the breastplate composed of 7 gems, one for each of the 7 planets of Mesopotamian astrology, and to be worn by the king. Among the Assyrian texts, given the formula for incantations and various magical operations, there is one which treats of an ornament composed of 7 brilliant stones, to be worn on the breast of the king as an amulet. Indeed, so great was the virtue of these stones that they were supposed to constitute an ornament for the gods also. The text, as rendered by Fossey, is as follows. Incantation, the splendid stones, the splendid stones, the stones of abundance and joy, made resplendent for the flesh of the gods. The Hulaini stone, the Sigaru stone, the Hulalu stone, Sandu stone, the Uknu stone, the Dushu stone, the precious stone Elmeshu, perfect in celestial beauty, the stone of which the Pingu is set in gold, placed upon the shining breast of the king as an ornament. Azagsud, high priest of Bel, make them shine, make them sparkle. Let the evil one keep aloof from the dwelling. Note carefully the reference to the Assyrian high priest, exhorting him to make the stones shine and sparkle, suggesting that not only did Egyptian temple priests have a secret of making gemstones suggesting that not only did Egyptian temple priests have a secret of making gemstones phosphoresce, that their Mesopotamian counterparts did as well. Similar breastplates were associated with Babylon and even the king of Tyre as well. So what of the Hebrew high priest breastplate? Here there is a rich rabbinical and even Muslim tradition. The 12 stones of the high priest's breastplate are first associated with the 12 angels who guard the gates of paradise. The Jewish historian Flavius Josephus, moreover, records a tradition in which the high priest's garments were also fastened at the shoulders with phosphorescing stones. Moreover, each of the 12 stones of the breastplate was engraved with the names of each of the 12 tribes. Josephus further associates the 12 stones of the ephod to the 12 months of the year, and to the zodiac as well. By medieval times, Jewish tradition definitely associated the 12 tribes to the signs of the zodiac in the following correspondence. Judah, Aries, Issachar, Taurus, Zebulun, Gemini, Reuben, Cancer, Simeon, Leo, Gad, Virgo, Ephraim, Libra, Manasseh, Scorpio, Benjamin, Sagittarius, Dan, Capricorn, Naphtali, Aquarius, Asher, Pisces. The breastplate, like the Ark of the Covenant, is one of those objects of historical religious power from the Jewish temple that, after the fall of Jerusalem to the Roman armies in 70 AD, seems to disappear from history. Where did the ephod with gems go? Kunz's answer is worth citing extensively. The treasures of the temple were carried off to Rome, and we learn from Josephus that the breastplate was deposited in the Temple of Concord, which had been erected by Vespasian. Here it is believed to have been at the time of the sacking of Rome by the Vandals under Genseric in 455, although Reverend C.W. King thinks it is not improbable that Alaric, king of the Visigoths, when he sacked Rome in 410 A.D., might have secured this treasure. However, the express statement of Procopius that the vessel of the Jews were carried through the streets of Constantinople on the occasion of the Vandalic triumph of Belisarius in 534 may be taken as confirmation of the conjecture that the Vandals had secured possession of the plate and its jewels. It must, however, be carefully noted that Procopius nowhere mentions the breastplate, and that it need not have been included among the vessels of the Jews. It appears that this part of the spoils of Belisarius was placed by Justinian in the sacristy of the Church of Sophia. Sometime later, the emperor is said to have heard the saying of a certain Jew to the effect that, until the treasures of the temple were restored to Jerusalem, they would bring misfortune upon any place where they might be kept. If this story be true, Justinian may have felt that the fate of Rome was a lesson for him, and that Constantinople must be saved from a like disaster. Moved by such considerations, he is said to have sent the sacred jewels to Jerusalem, and they were placed in the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. All right. This brings us to the last two events, which can even be plausibly connected with the mystic 12 gems, namely the capture and sack of Jerusalem by the Sasanian Persian king Khusru II in 615, and the overthrow of the Sasanian Empire by the Mohammedan Arabs, and the capture and sack of Ctesiphon in 637. If we admit that Khusru took the sacred relics of the temple with him to Persia, we may be reasonably sure that they were included among the spoils secured by the Arab conquerors, although King, who has ingeniously endeavored to trace out the history of the breastplate jewels after the fall of Jerusalem in 70 A.D., believes that they may be still buried in some unknown treasure of one of the old Persian capitals. Lois, I just got your message. I will send you the link to this in just a second. Let me see. I can copy it from Wandering Fool, I think, here. I sent it to her earlier. It's a link on archive.org, and the article is actually called, it's actually from a book that I'm reading now called Babylon's Banksters, which is the title of this talk podcast here. So I'm going to send it to you now. I just copied it, and I'm actually in a later part of it. I think this. Hold on. Let me see if that sends it to you. Yeah. Okay. I sent you the link. All right. Continuing. All right. Let's see. All right. So we're talking about, if we admit that Khusru took the relics of the temple with him to Persia, we may be reasonably sure that they were included among the spoils secured by the Arab conquerors, although King, who has ingeniously endeavored to trace out the history of the breastplate jewels after the fall of Jerusalem in 70 A.D., believes that they may be still buried in some unknown chamber of one of the old Persian capitals. A fact which had generally been overlooked by those who have embarked on the sea of conjecture relative to the fate of the breastplate stones is that of a large Jewish contingent numbering some 26,000 men formed part of the force with which the Sasanian Persians captured Jerusalem, and they might well lay claim to any Jewish vessels of jewels that may have been secured by the conquerors. In this case, however, it is still that these precious objects fell into the hands of the Mohammedans who captured Jerusalem in the same year in which they took Ctesiphon. Contrary to all who believe that the ark and breastplate ended up in the west in the hands of Vandals and Visigoths, Kunz is correct, for by injecting the East Roman Empire back into the equation, he is clearly saying, look east rather than west, if one wishes to discover the whereabouts of the old Jewish temple treasure. C. Conclusions. The following constellation of relationships and implications has been exhibited in this chapter. 1. There are at least 3 disparate and significant clues to the existence of an international money power in ancient times, and to its reliance upon precious metal bullion as a medium of monetary exchange. The unusual bullion policies of Rome vis-a-vis the Orient, which policies were virtual opposites of each other with respect to the relative valuation of silver and gold bullion, such reciprocal policies could, of course, highly benefit an international money power with bases of operations in both places, for by transferring gold to the east and converting it to silver and reaping the fees thereof, and then silver to the west and converting it again to gold, vast profits could be accumulated. B. The almost universal association of temples with minting from the Middle East to China, and C. The presence of an international contingent of mercenaries from various countries and states at one of antiquity's largest gold mines at Bishari, mines which in turn are worked by slaves and prisoners of war. 2. In addition to the association of temples with the minting and issuance of money, and therefore with mining activity, these temples are also associated with astronomy and astrology. 3. Additionally, astrology and astronomy are in turn associated with precious gemstones, each type of which is associated with various planetary bodies and their influences. I need to stop here for a second before I get it, because something that I just looked at today, which just hit me in the head, in my memory just now, I'm in the bookstore and I was passing by a book and it said something almost exactly was said here. And it's this here. It says that we should be looking east, right, rather than west, right, with the money changing, right? So it says right here at the end of that, it says, contrary to all those who believe that the ark and breastplate ended up in the west in the hands of the Vandals and Visigoths, Kunz is correct. For by injecting the East Roman Empire back into the equation, he is clearly saying look east rather than west if one wishes to discover the whereabouts of the old Jewish temple treasure. So I have to go look at this book. Oh, crap. I have to go look at this book right now before I forget this, because it's right here. I just saw it. It's called The Silk Roads. All right. It says, a rare book that makes you question your assumptions about the world. And on the back cover, it says, for more than a history of the Silk Roads, this book is truly a revelatory new history of the world, promising to destabilize notions of where we come from and where we are headed next. From the Middle East and its political instability to China and its economic rise, the vast region stretching eastward from the Balkans across the Steppe and the South Asia has been thrust into the global spotlight in recent years. In order to comprehend what is at stake for the cities and nations built on these intricate trade routes, Frankopan, which is the author of this book, Peter Frankopan, teaches us that we must first grab their astounding pasts. Frankopan realigns our understanding of the world, pointing us eastward. It was on the Silk roads that East and West first encountered each other through trade and conquest, leading to the spread of ideas, cultures, and religions. From the rise and fall of empires to the spread of Buddhism and the advent of Christianity, Islam, right up to the great wars of the 20th century. Listen to this last sentence right here. It almost mirrors exactly what I just read from that book from 2010, which is 13 years ago, right? And let me look in the front cover and see where this book was published. This is called The Silk Roads, international bestseller by Peter Frankopan. It was published in this one, 2015, so 5 years later. And listen to what the last sentence says. It says, this book shows how the fate of the West has always been inextricably linked to the East. Once again, it said, this book shows how the fate of the West has always been inextricably linked to the East. That said, with remember today being the meeting of BRICS, right? Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, with the new currency being speculated about, right? This is interesting because doesn't that match up with what it says the fate of the West is inextricably linked to the East from that book, The Silk Road, right? And then we have here that he is clearly saying, look east rather than west if one wishes to discover the whereabouts of the old Jewish temple treasure. So this is some interesting stuff. Okay, I got to continue and finish this out here. So the almost universal association of temples with minting from the Middle East to China, and the presence of an international contingent of mercenaries from various countries and states of antiquity's largest gold mines at Bishari, mines which in turn are worked by slaves and prisoners of war. Remember, this is the conclusion, and it's talking about the following constellation of relationships and implications has been detailed in this chapter. Going on, it says, I'm going to go from 2 again. It says, in addition to the association of temples with the minting and issuance of money, and therefore with mining activity, these temples are also associated with astronomy and astrology. 3. Additionally, astrology and astronomy are in turn associated with precious gemstones, each type of which is associated with various planetary bodies and their influences. 4. The various gods of the pantheons of the Middle East, since they can at one level be decoded as celestial bodies, are parallel. That is to say, the various pantheons themselves show remarkable parallels due to their similar astrological derivation. At this juncture, a significant question was implied. A. Could the parallelism of various pantheons be due not only to their astronomical derivation, but also because of the activity of that class of international bullion broker that appears to be associated with the temple in all lands and influencing the bullion policy to its advantage in several states? And B, if so, then is there a deeper reason for their association with the practice of astrology in the temples? If there is, then what is it? And what is the connection between all this and precious gemstones? C. These gemstones were seen in turn by the ancients and in esoteric tradition to have certain powers. Among these we note the following. 1. Possess the power to heal. 2. They possess the power to predict the future. 3. They could phosphoresce under certain conditions, and this was most likely a closely held secret of the temple priesthoods in various civilizations. 4. They conferred invisibility. 5. They conferred the power to levitate. 6. In Solomon's case, certain stones conferred power over creation. We are thus in the presence of a complex dynamic, and making sense of it will not be easy. But before we can address this issue, we must assemble more data by taking a closer look at the activities of this ancient bullion brokers international. For those activities will disclose the common thread and clue. Alchemy. All right, and that's it for this now. That will be going on to chapter 5 next, which is money, monotheism, monarchies, and militaries. The thesis of David Assel. And it's with a quote again that says, "They are but pudgy and sly little men, as much overwhelmed by the monster they have raised, the foolish nations that permitted them to do so." All right. You've been listening to Babylon's Banksters. Ancient Temple Roots, presented by Hakeem Alibokis Alexander on Wisdom, Social Audio Inc., and Spreaker, Social Podcasting, presented for World Reading Club in association with ExercisingYourMind.com and UniquilibriuM.